Hello, and welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. If you're listening to this, you're looking for rest, for peace, for a gentle journey into sleep. And that's exactly what we're going to do together. For the next hour and a half, I'm going to tell you the story of ancient Greece, not in a way that demands your attention or asks you to remember facts for a test, but in a way that lets you simply drift, listening when you want to listen, letting go when you want to let go, allowing the story to wash over you like gentle waves on a distant shore. You don't need to stay awake. You don't need to follow every word. In fact, the goal is quite the opposite, to let yourself relax so completely that sleep finds you naturally, peacefully, whenever it's ready. So go ahead now and settle yourself into the most comfortable position you can find. Adjust your pillow, pull your blanket up, let your body sink into the softness beneath you. Take a slow, deep breath in, and let it out completely, feeling any tension in your shoulders melting away. Another deep breath, and as you exhale, feel your jaw relax, your face soften, your eyes grow heavy. Perfect. You're exactly where you need to be. There's nothing to do now but listen, or drift, or dream. Let my voice guide you gently back through time, to a world of marble temples and olive groves, of philosophers and poets, of ideas that shaped our world and stories that have echoed through millennia. If you fall asleep in the first 10 minutes, that's wonderful. If you drift in and out, hearing pieces of the story like fragments of a dream, that's perfect too. There's no wrong way to experience this journey. Let your breathing become slow and natural, feel yourself sinking deeper into relaxation with each exhale, and when you're ready, or even if you're not quite ready, we'll begin our peaceful journey through ancient Greece. Welcome to a peaceful journey through time. Tonight, we travel back thousands of years, to a world of warm Mediterranean winds, ancient olive groves, and civilizations that rose slowly, like the sun over marble mountains. Let yourself settle in, becoming comfortable and still, as we drift together into the gentle story of ancient Greece. Breathe deeply, and let us begin. Long before there were temples with white columns reaching toward endless blue skies, before there were philosophers walking through sunlit courtyards, the land we now call Greece was home to people who lived simply, quietly, tending small farms and fishing villages scattered along rocky coastlines. Around 3000 BCE, in the soft warmth of the Bronze Age, something remarkable began to emerge on the island of Crete. The Minoan civilization was taking root, growing steadily like wild thyme on a hillside, becoming the first advanced society in Europe. Picture this civilization unfolding slowly over centuries, its people building elaborate palaces with winding corridors and peaceful courtyards where light filtered through in golden streams. The Minoans were a people who loved beauty and movement. Their palace at Knossos, vast and labyrinthine, was not built all at once, but grew organically over hundreds of years, expanding room by room, corridor by corridor, until it became a sprawling complex covering nearly 6 acres of sun-warmed earth. Imagine walking through those ancient halls, your footsteps soft on stone floors, passing vibrant frescoes painted on smooth plaster walls. These paintings, rendered in rich earth tones of rust and ochre and deep marine blue, depicted something unusual for their time. They showed dolphins leaping through turquoise waters, young people gracefully somersaulting over the backs of bulls, and priestesses in flowing robes with peaceful, serene expressions. This was a civilization that seemed to cherish gentleness, where women held positions of prominence and power, their images painted larger and more central than many male figures in the art that survived the centuries. Let yourself drift deeper now, as we move through time. The Minoans thrived for over 500 years in relative peace, a remarkably long stretch of tranquility in human history. Unlike many ancient peoples who built massive defensive walls around their cities, the Minoans left their settlements open to the sea breeze and sunshine, suggesting a society that felt safe, secure in its island home. They developed the first writing system in Europe, a script we call Linear A, its symbols still undeciphered, keeping their prayers and poetry and daily records locked in mystery, like secrets whispered to the wind and never repeated. Around 1600 BCE, while the Minoans still flourished on Crete, another culture was emerging on the Greek mainland to the north. The Mycenaeans, named for their great citadel at Mycenae, were different in temperament from their Minoan neighbors. They were warriors and builders of massive stone fortifications, yet they too contributed something lasting and beautiful to the world. The Mycenaeans constructed their palaces and fortresses using stones so enormous that later Greeks, staring up at these ancient walls, couldn't imagine how mortals had lifted them. They called this building technique Cyclopean masonry, believing only the mythical Cyclopes, those one-eyed giants of legend, could have moved such tremendous blocks of limestone into place. Stand for a moment in your mind's eye before these walls, feeling small beneath their weight, your hand resting on stone that has held its position for more than 3,000 years. The Mycenaeans developed their own writing system, adapting and transforming the Minoan Linear A into what we call Linear B. When this script was finally deciphered in the 1950s, scholars discovered they were reading an early form of Greek, making these the oldest written records of the Greek language. These were not grand poems or philosophical treatises, but something more humble and human: inventories of grain and sheep, records of wool production, lists of offerings to the gods. They tell us of a people carefully tracking their resources, preparing for winter, honoring their deities with measured portions of olive oil and honey. Around 1450 BCE, something changed on Crete. The Minoan civilization, which had flowered for so long in relative peace, began to fade. The reasons remain mysterious and gentle in their ambiguity. Perhaps a massive volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, perhaps earthquakes that came in rolling waves, or perhaps the slow expansion of Mycenaean influence from the mainland. Whatever the cause, the transition seems to have been gradual, a slow dimming rather than a sudden extinguishing of light. The palace at Knossos continued on for a time under Mycenaean administration, a blending of two cultures, two ways of seeing the world. Breathe deeply now, letting these images settle like dust motes in afternoon sun. For several centuries, the Mycenaean civilization spread across the Greek world, establishing settlements and trading networks that reached as far as Egypt and the distant shores of Italy. Their artisans crafted beautiful objects, delicate gold masks placed over the faces of their honored dead, inlaid daggers showing scenes of hunting and nature rendered in precious metals, and pottery painted with octopi whose tentacles curved gracefully around ceramic surfaces. This was the world that would later inspire the great epic poems, the world that Homer would look back upon with longing and call the Age of Heroes. But even the Mycenaeans, powerful as they were, eventually faded. Around 1200 BCE, the great palace centers across the Mediterranean world began to collapse, not just in Greece but throughout the entire region, in a period scholars now call the Bronze Age collapse. The causes were likely many and complex: invasions, internal conflicts, drought, famine, perhaps all of these things combined in ways we can only imagine. The massive stone walls remained standing, but the palaces fell silent. The careful record-keeping stopped. The art of writing itself was forgotten in Greece, disappearing like morning mist, not to return for hundreds of years. And so Greece entered what we call the Dark Ages, though perhaps we should call them the Quiet Ages instead. For nearly 400 years, from roughly 1200 to 800 BCE, life became simpler, smaller, more local. People lived in small farming communities, tending their olive trees and grapevines, fishing from small boats, telling stories by firelight of the great heroes who had come before. It was a time of forgetting, yes, but also a time of patient endurance, of traditions passed orally from generation to generation, of survival and slow, steady continuation. Let yourself rest in this quiet time. Imagine the peaceful rhythm of village life, the same tasks repeated with the turning of seasons, the comfort of routine in community. And here, in this peaceful darkness, we'll pause our journey for now. The ancient world sleeps around us, waiting patiently for what comes next. Let yourself drift, rest, knowing that the story continues, gentle and unfolding, whenever you're ready to return. Welcome back to our quiet journey. If you've drifted away, that's perfectly natural. Let yourself settle once more as we continue our slow walk through the ancient world. We find ourselves now in the gentle darkness of Greece's quiet centuries, where something patient and beautiful is beginning to stir. Around 800 BCE, as the Dark Ages slowly lifted like fog from the mountains, the Greek world began to awaken again, emerging not as one unified nation, but as something more intimate and human in scale. Across the landscape, small independent city-states began to form, each one a world unto itself, nestled in valleys or perched on coastal plains. These city-states, which the Greeks called polis, became the defining feature of their civilization, each one developing its own character, its own traditions, its own sense of identity as distinct and precious as a fingerprint. Some grew around natural harbors where fishing boats rocked gently at anchor, others around fertile plains where wheat and barley swayed in summer breezes, and still others on rocky hilltops where the air was thin and clear and every sunrise felt like a gift. The most famous of these city-states would be Athens and Sparta, but there were hundreds of others scattered across Greece and eventually throughout the Mediterranean world. Corinth, Thebes, Megara, Argos, each one fiercely proud of its independence, its unique way of being Greek. Imagine a world where your loyalty belonged not to a vast empire stretching beyond the horizon, but to a community small enough that you might know many of your fellow citizens by name, where you could walk from your home to the city center in the time it takes for bread to bake, where the boundaries of your world were marked by mountains you could see from your doorstep. Let yourself breathe into this sense of place, of belonging to something human-sized and knowable. During this same period of reawakening, something remarkable happened. The Greeks learned to write again. They adapted the Phoenician alphabet, those merchants and sailors from the eastern Mediterranean who had maintained their own elegant script through the dark centuries. But the Greeks made a crucial innovation, one that would ripple through history. Script, like many ancient writing systems, recorded only consonants, leaving readers to fill in the vowel sounds from context and memory. The Greeks added vowels, creating for the first time a writing system where every sound could be captured and preserved with clarity. This alphabet, emerging around 800 BCE, became the ancestor of the Latin letters we still use today, these very characters flowing across the page, a gift passed down through millennia. With writing restored, stories that had been carefully preserved in memory for generations could finally be recorded in permanent form. It was during this time that a poet known as Homer, whose very existence remains beautifully uncertain and mysterious, composed or compiled or wrote down two of the most influential works in Western literature. The Iliad and the Odyssey, those great epic poems, were not tales of Homer's contemporary world but memories of the distant Bronze Age, of the Mycenaean heroes and their legendary exploits. These poems, sung and recited for hundreds of years before being written down, told of the Trojan War and its aftermath, of warriors and kings, of long journeys home across wine-dark seas. Through Homer's verses, the Greeks maintained a connection to their past, transforming history into legend, creating a shared mythology that would bind Greek communities together even as they remained politically separate. Around 776 BCE, according to ancient tradition, another unifying force emerged in the Greek world. The Olympic Games were established at Olympia, a sacred sanctuary nestled in a peaceful valley in the Peloponnese. These games were not merely athletic competitions but religious festivals dedicated to Zeus, the king of the gods. Every 4 years, athletes from Greek city-states throughout the known world would travel to Olympia, and during the Games, all wars between Greek states would cease. This sacred truce, called the Ekakeria, allowed competitors and spectators to travel safely to and from the festival, creating windows of peace in a world where conflict between rival city-states was common as summer rain. Picture this valley filled with tens of thousands of people, speaking different dialects, loyal to different cities, yet united in their shared Greekness, their common language and gods and love of athletic excellence. The Olympic Games would continue uninterrupted for over 1,000 years, becoming one of the longest-lasting institutions in ancient history. Athletes competed completely nude, a practice that shocked non-Greek peoples but which the Greeks saw as natural and beautiful, a celebration of the human body and its strength and grace. The victors received no material prizes, no gold or silver, only a simple wreath woven from olive branches cut from a sacred tree. Yet these olive wreaths were treasured beyond precious metals, for they brought immortal glory, ensuring that the athlete's name would be remembered and celebrated in poetry and song long after they had departed this world. Long pause. Breathe deeply, let the image of that ancient sanctuary settle around you, the smell of olive trees, the distant sound of cheering carried on warm air. As the Greek world continued to expand and flourish, people began to look beyond their crowded homeland for new opportunities. From roughly 750 to 550 BCE, the Greeks engaged in what we call the Great Colonization, a peaceful spreading out across the Mediterranean and Black Sea coasts. Motivated not by conquest but by the need for new farmland, by curiosity, by the desire for trade, Greek communities established colonies from the shores of Spain to the coast of modern-day Ukraine. These weren't colonies in the later European sense, territories controlled by a distant motherland, but independent city-states in their own right, maintaining cultural and religious ties to the cities from which they had originated but governing themselves freely. Each colony carried with them the sacred fire from their mother city's hearth, a symbolic link to home even as they built new homes in distant lands. One of the most important Greek colonies was Syracuse in Sicily, founded by settlers from Corinth around 733 BCE. Syracuse would eventually become one of the most powerful and prosperous cities in the entire Greek world, its harbors filled with merchant ships, its temples grand and beautiful, its inhabitants proud of their Greek heritage even as they created something new in the fertile Sicilian soil. These colonial cities spread Greek culture, language, and ideas across vast distances, ensuring that Greek influence would extend far beyond the borders of Greece itself. As these colonies flourished, Greek culture began to develop some of its most distinctive and lasting characteristics. The Greeks, unlike many ancient peoples, did not have a single sacred text or a priestly class that controlled religious knowledge. Instead, their religion was a living, evolving collection of myths and rituals, stories about gods who were powerful yet flawed, immortal yet subject to emotions and conflicts that felt recognizably human. Zeus might be king of the gods, but he was not all-knowing or perfectly just. Athena was wise, but she had her favorites and her enemies. Apollo brought both healing and plague. These were gods who could be bargained with, honored through sacrifice and prayer, but never fully controlled or predicted. This religious worldview, where even the gods operated within certain limits, may have contributed to the Greek intellectual tradition of questioning, debating, seeking to understand the patterns and rules that govern both divine and natural worlds. Let yourself rest in this ancient worldview, where mystery and understanding intertwined like vines. And so the Greek world grew and flourished, spreading outward like ripples on still water, carrying their language and stories and ways of seeing to distant shores. The story continues, gentle and unfolding, but for now, rest. Let these images settle softly around you like evening shadows, knowing we can return whenever you're ready to journey further. If you're still with us on this journey, allow yourself to settle even more deeply now, and if you've drifted into sleep and returned, welcome back to the gentle unfolding of ancient Greece. We find ourselves now in the archaic period, when Greek civilization was beginning to take forms that would shape the world for millennia to come. In the city-state of Sparta, tucked into the valley of the Eurotas River and surrounded by protective mountains, a unique way of life was taking shape. The Spartans developed what they called a goge, a rigorous training system for their young people that began at age 7 and continued into adulthood. This was not education as we might think of it today, not gentle lessons in reading and arithmetic, but a complete reshaping of character and body designed to create the finest warriors in Greece. Yet even in this most martial of societies, there was a certain austere beauty, a commitment to excellence and self-discipline that the Spartans valued above wealth or comfort. They spoke briefly, using few words to convey maximum meaning, giving us the term laconic from Laconia, their homeland. They ate simple meals together, citizens and kings side by side. They valued equality among citizens so highly that they forbade gold and silver currency, using only heavy iron bars that discouraged the accumulation of wealth. But Sparta had another distinctive feature that set it apart in the Greek world. Spartan women enjoyed freedoms and rights unusual for their time. While women in most Greek city-states lived secluded lives, Spartan women owned property, managed estates while men were away at war, exercised publicly to maintain their strength, and spoke freely even in the presence of men. Ancient writers from other Greek cities expressed shock at Spartan women's independence and physical vigor, yet this system endured for centuries, suggesting it worked for Sparta even as it puzzled and disturbed their neighbors. Breathe slowly, imagine the Spartan landscape, those protective mountains standing eternal guard. Meanwhile, in Athens, a different kind of revolution was quietly beginning. Around 594 BCE, a poet and statesman named Solon was chosen to help resolve conflicts between Athens' wealthy aristocrats and its struggling poor farmers, many of whom had fallen into debt slavery. Solon, granted extraordinary powers to reform the city, made changes that would echo through history. He canceled all debts and freed those who had been enslaved for debt, returning them to liberty and dignity. He reformed Athens' political system, creating a framework where citizens were divided into classes based on wealth rather than birth alone, opening paths to political participation for those who had previously been excluded. Though Solon's reforms did not create democracy immediately, they planted seeds that would gradually grow, establishing the principle that laws should apply equally to all citizens and that the community's welfare mattered more than any individual's power. Solon wrote poetry about his reforms, verses that have survived the centuries, speaking of justice and balance, of the dangers of extremes, of his hope that his laws would endure. He saw himself not as a revolutionary but as a mediator, seeking the middle path between competing demands, trying to give each group enough to prevent civil war while disappointing each group's most extreme wishes. After implementing his reforms, Solon left Athens for 10 years, traveling abroad to prevent anyone from pressuring him to change what he had done, trusting the city to live with his laws and learn from them. As the 6th century BCE continued, Greek culture produced its first philosophers, lovers of wisdom who asked fundamental questions about the nature of reality itself. In the prosperous coastal cities of Ionia, in what is now Turkey, thinkers began to move away from purely mythological explanations of the world and toward rational inquiry. Thales of Miletus, who lived around 624 to 546 BCE, proposed that water was the fundamental substance underlying all things, that everything in the diverse world could ultimately be understood as transformations of this single element. His answer may seem simple to us now, almost quaint, but the question itself was revolutionary. What is the basic nature of reality? Can we understand the world through reason and observation rather than only through stories of the gods? Thales was followed by other Ionian thinkers, each proposing their own answers. Anaximander suggested an indefinite, boundless substance he called the infinite as the source of all things. Anaximenes proposed air as the fundamental element, constantly moving and transforming. These early philosophers were not just making guesses, they were establishing a new way of thinking, the idea that the universe operated according to principles that human reason could potentially understand. They were planting seeds of scientific thinking in soil that had previously grown only myth and poetry. Let yourself drift with these ancient questions, these first attempts to understand. No need to find answers, only to float peacefully among the wondering. Around 570 BCE, on the island of Samos, a man named Pythagoras was born. He would grow up to become one of the most influential and mysterious figures in ancient Greek thought. Pythagoras eventually established a community in southern Italy, a philosophical and religious brotherhood that lived according to strict rules. They practiced vegetarianism, believing in the transmigration of souls and therefore refusing to eat anything that might house a reincarnated soul. They studied mathematics with religious devotion, believing that numbers were the fundamental reality underlying all existence. The Pythagoreans discovered the mathematical ratios underlying musical harmony, finding that strings of different lengths, when their ratios were simple whole numbers, produced pleasant harmonious sounds together. This discovery suggested to them that the entire cosmos might be ordered according to mathematical principles, that the universe itself was fundamentally musical, harmonious, beautiful in ways that numbers could express. The Pythagorean theorem, that elegant relationship between the sides of a right triangle, may not have been discovered by Pythagoras himself but was certainly developed within his community, a gift of pure mathematical truth that has served humanity ever since. The Pythagoreans maintained such secrecy about their teachings that we know them more through legend than through direct knowledge, but their influence on later Greek philosophy, especially on Plato, would be profound and lasting. During this same period, the Greeks were developing new forms of artistic expression. Around 600 BCE, a new style of pottery painting emerged that we call black figureware. Athenian potters and painters created vessels where human figures and mythological scenes were painted in glossy black slip against the natural red-orange of the clay. The artists would then incise fine details into the black figures, creating lines that revealed the red clay beneath, allowing them to show clothing folds, facial features, individual strands of hair. These weren't crude decorations but sophisticated artworks, each face telling a story, heroes battling monsters, gods attending feasts, everyday people going about their daily work. The potter and painter collaborated closely, understanding that the shape of the vessel and the images painted on it were inseparable, form and decoration working together to create something beautiful and useful at once. By 530 BCE, Athenian artists had developed an even more refined technique called red figure painting. This time the background was painted black while the figures were left in the natural red color of the clay, with details painted on rather than incised. This reversal allowed for much greater naturalism and detail, letting artists show muscles, drapery, emotion with unprecedented subtlety. Looking at these vases now, 25 centuries later, we can still see the care and skill lavished on objects that were made to be used, to hold wine or water or olive oil, reminding us that beauty and utility were never opposites in the Greek mind. Rest now in this world of emerging beauty and thought, where questions were being asked that had never been asked before, where art was reaching toward grace. The Greek world was awakening to its own potential, discovering what human beings might achieve when they questioned, created, and contemplated. Let these peaceful images settle around you, the potter's wheel turning slowly, the philosopher walking at dawn, the mountains standing guard over valleys where new ideas grew like wild herbs. Rest deeply now, the story continues whenever you wish to return. Drift with us now, deeper into the ancient world, let go of any tension remaining in your body, as we continue our slow journey through time. We arrive now at the threshold of the 5th century BCE, a period when the Greek world would face its greatest external challenge and, in meeting that challenge, discover heights of courage and creativity it had not known it possessed. To the east of Greece lay the Persian Empire, the largest and most powerful realm the world had yet seen. Stretching from the borders of India to the shores of the Mediterranean, from the mountains of Central Asia to the deserts of Egypt, Persia was vast beyond Greek comprehension, a land of countless peoples and languages united under the rule of the great king. The Persians were not barbaric or cruel by the standards of their time. They were sophisticated administrators who generally allowed conquered peoples to maintain their own customs and religions as long as they paid tribute and acknowledged Persian authority. But to the Greeks, with their small independent city-states and fierce love of autonomy, Persian rule represented everything they opposed, the subjugation of free people to the will of a single ruler, no matter how benevolent that ruler might be. In 499 BCE, the Greek cities of Ionia, those prosperous settlements on the coast of Asia Minor that had given birth to philosophy, revolted against Persian rule. Athens and Eretria, mainland Greek cities, sent ships and soldiers to support their Ionian cousins. The revolt lasted 6 years before the Persians, with their overwhelming resources, crushed it. But the Persian king, Darius the Great, did not forget the mainland Greeks who had dared to interfere in his empire. In 490 BCE, a Persian fleet crossed the Aegean Sea, carrying soldiers to punish Athens and Eretria for their intervention. The Persians landed at Marathon, a coastal plain northeast of Athens, a place where the ground was level enough for the Persian cavalry to maneuver effectively. The Athenians marched out to meet them, greatly outnumbered, accompanied only by a small contingent from the city of Plataea. For several days, the two armies faced each other across the plain, neither willing to make the first move. Then, learning that the Persian cavalry had temporarily left the battlefield, perhaps to board ships, the Athenian general Miltiades ordered an attack. The Athenian hoplites, heavily armored infantry soldiers, charged across nearly a mile of open ground at a run, closing the distance before Persian archers could inflict devastating casualties. The battle was fierce but brief. The Greek phalanx, that tightly packed formation of overlapping shields and projecting spears, proved superior to Persian tactics on this particular field on this particular day. When the battle ended, approximately 6,000 Persians lay dead on the plain of Marathon, while Athenian casualties numbered fewer than 200. According to later legend, a messenger named Phidippides ran from Marathon to Athens, a distance of about 26 miles, to announce the victory, gasping out "We have won," before collapsing and dying from exhaustion. Whether this specific story is true or embellished, the Battle of Marathon became a defining moment in Athenian identity, proof that free citizens fighting for their homes could defeat the seemingly invincible Persian Empire. The plain of Marathon would be a place of pilgrimage for Athenians for centuries afterward, where they could stand on the mound covering their fallen ancestors and remember the day when courage triumphed over overwhelming odds. Breathe deeply, let the quiet pride of that ancient victory settle softly around you. But Persia was not finished with Greece. 10 years later, in 480 BCE, Darius's son Xerxes assembled an enormous army and navy, determined to conquer Greece completely and permanently. Ancient sources claimed millions of soldiers in the Persian force, numbers surely exaggerated by Greek pride and fear, but the invasion force was certainly massive by any standard, perhaps the largest military expedition the ancient Mediterranean had yet seen. Xerxes had a bridge of boats constructed across the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Asia from Europe, and his army marched across, so numerous that they drank rivers dry as they passed. The Greek city-states, facing extinction, did something they had rarely managed before: they cooperated. 31 city-states, including the longtime rivals Athens and Sparta, formed an alliance to resist the Persian invasion. Sparta, renowned for its warriors, took leadership of the Greek land forces, while Athens, which had spent the previous decade building a powerful navy, commanded the fleet. The Greeks chose to make their first stand at Thermopylae, a narrow coastal pass between the mountains and the sea, where the Persian advantage in numbers would be minimized. At Thermopylae, King Leonidas of Sparta led a force of about 7,000 Greek soldiers, including his personal guard of 300 Spartans. For 2 days, they held the pass against wave after wave of Persian attacks, the narrow terrain preventing the Persians from bringing their full force to bear. The Spartans fought in perfect formation, shields locked, their discipline and training turning the pass into a killing ground for the attackers. Xerxes, watching from a throne position to observe the battle, was said to have leaped from his seat 3 times in agitation as he witnessed his elite troops, including his immortals, repulsed by the stubborn Greek defenders. On the third day, a local Greek showed the Persians a mountain path that allowed them to outflank the defenders. Learning of this, Leonidas sent most of the Greek force away to fight another day, but he and his 300 Spartans remained, along with several hundred Thespians and Thebans who refused to abandon them. They fought to the last man, knowing they would die but buying precious time for the rest of Greece to prepare its defenses. Thermopylae was a defeat, but it became a legend of sacrifice and valor that inspired Greeks for generations. The epitaph composed for the Spartan dead, attributed to the poet Simonides, achieved immortal simplicity. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Rest in the quiet courage of that ancient stand, where duty and love of homeland became one. While Leonidas died at Thermopylae, the Greek navy was fighting its own crucial battle at Artemisium, a strait near the pass. The battles there were inconclusive, neither side gaining clear advantage, but the Greek fleet remained intact and withdrew in good order when news came of Thermopylae's fall. The Athenian general Themistocles, who had been instrumental in convincing Athens to build its navy, now implemented a desperate plan. Athens itself would be abandoned to the Persians. The entire population, men, women, children, elders, would evacuate to nearby islands into the Peloponnese, while the Athenian navy would seek a decisive battle at sea. The Persians occupied Athens and burned the temples on the Acropolis in revenge for the burning of Sardis during the Ionian Revolt. But the true Athens, its people and their spirit, had not been captured. The Greek fleet gathered in the narrow straits of Salamis, an island just off the Athenian coast. Themistocles lured the Persian navy into these confined waters, where their superior numbers became a disadvantage. The larger Persian ships had difficulty maneuvering in the narrow space and collided with one another as Greek triremes, more agile and maneuverable, rammed and boarded them. Xerxes watched from a throne on shore as his fleet was systematically destroyed, the water between Salamis and the mainland turning red with blood, choked with broken ships and drowning sailors. The Battle of Salamis, fought in September of 480 BCE, was one of the most decisive naval battles in history. The Persian fleet, crippled and demoralized, withdrew. Xerxes himself returned to Persia, leaving his general Mardonius with a large army to continue the campaign. But without naval superiority, the Persian position was precarious. The following summer, at Plataea, the united Greek army, led by the Spartan regent Pausanias, decisively defeated the Persian land forces. Mardonius fell in battle, and the surviving Persians retreated to Asia. Greece had survived, small, divided, seemingly outmatched, yet victorious against the greatest empire in the world. Let this image rest with you. David standing over Goliath, not with pride but with quiet wonder at what courage and unity had achieved. The Persian wars had ended, and Greece had been transformed by the experience. In victory, the Greeks had discovered both their strength and their potential. Rest now in this moment of triumph tempered by sacrifice. Let the gentle waves of the Aegean carry you towards sleep, knowing that from this crucible of war would emerge an age of unprecedented creativity and thought. The story continues, but for now, simply rest. Ancient Greek History Sleep Story, 5th 10 minutes, minutes 40 to 50. Gentle continuation. Welcome back to this quiet journey, or welcome to deeper rest if you've drifted away. We find ourselves now in the aftermath of the Persian Wars, in a Greece that had survived but was forever changed. From the ashes of burned temples and the memory of shared sacrifice, something extraordinary was about to bloom, an age so brilliant that its light still reaches us across 25 centuries. In the years following the Persian Wars, Athens emerged as the dominant naval power in the Greek world. Under the leadership of the Athenian statesman Pericles, who guided the city from roughly 461 to 429 BCE, Athens entered what we now call its Golden Age, a period of unprecedented cultural flourishing. Pericles himself was an aristocrat by birth but a democrat by conviction, a man of dignity and restraint who rarely appeared in public, preferring to work behind the scenes, speaking in the assembly only on the most important matters. When he did speak, his eloquence was legendary, his words measured and powerful, capable of moving the Athenian people like wind moves waves on the sea. Pericles envisioned Athens as a school for all of Greece, a city that would embody the highest achievements of human civilization. He initiated an ambitious building program to restore what the Persians had destroyed and to create monuments worthy of Athens' new status. The most famous of these projects was the Parthenon, a temple dedicated to Athena, the city's patron goddess. Construction began in 447 BCE on the Acropolis, that rocky outcrop rising above the city, visible from miles away to sailors approaching Athens' port at Piraeus. Let yourself imagine that temple slowly taking shape, workers cutting marble from Mount Pentelicus, its fine-grained white stone that would glow golden in the Mediterranean sun, skilled craftsmen measuring and fitting each massive block with such precision that no mortar was needed, the temple rising column by column, its proportions carefully calculated to create an illusion of perfect straightness, for the architects understood that truly straight lines appear curved to the human eye. And so they built in subtle curves to make the building appear perfectly rectilinear. The Parthenon was not just architecture but mathematics, philosophy, and art combined into a single harmonious whole, a prayer made of stone. The temple's sculptural decorations, overseen by the great sculptor Phidias, depicted scenes from myth and Athenian history. The eastern pediment showed Athena's birth, fully grown and armored, from Zeus's head. The western pediment showed Athena's contest with Poseidon for patronage of the city. And running around the interior of the colonnade was a continuous frieze showing the Panathenaic procession, the great festival when all Athens came together to honor their goddess. This frieze was revolutionary in that it depicted not gods or heroes but ordinary Athenian citizens, men on horseback, women carrying ritual vessels, elders in conversation, elevating everyday people to the same artistic dignity traditionally reserved for the divine. Breathe slowly, picture that sacred hill crowned with temples gleaming white against infinite blue sky. During this same period, Athenian democracy was reaching its fullest development. Democracy, from the Greek words demos meaning people and kratos meaning power, was Athens' most radical and influential invention. It was not democracy as we understand it today. Women, slaves, and foreigners could not participate, and the city's prosperity depended on slavery in ways that deeply complicate our admiration. But for adult male citizens, Athens practiced a direct democracy more thoroughgoing than almost any system before or since. Major decisions were made not by elected representatives but by the assembly, where any citizen could attend, speak, and vote. Important positions were often filled not by election but by lottery, based on the principle that any citizen was capable of serving their city. Citizens served on juries, typically numbering in the hundreds for important cases, making bribery or intimidation nearly impossible. They rotated through positions of responsibility, learning to govern by governing, understanding their city's needs by serving its functions. This system produced an engaged citizenry, people who understood that their individual freedom and their civic responsibility were inseparable, that the polis was not something separate from themselves but the community they created together through constant participation. Pericles, in his famous funeral oration, would describe Athenian democracy as a system where the many rule for the common good, where advancement comes from merit rather than birth, where poverty is no barrier to service, and where citizens develop themselves as whole human beings, capable of deliberating on policy as skillfully as they conduct their private affairs. This was also the great age of Athenian drama, an art form born from religious festivals honoring Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and transformation. 3 times a year, particularly during the city Dionysia in early spring, Athenians gathered in the great outdoor theater built into the southern slope of the Acropolis to watch theatrical performances from dawn until dusk. These were not mere entertainment but civic rituals, attended by virtually the entire citizen body, with the city providing subsidies so even the poorest could attend. The tragedies, written by poets like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, explored fundamental questions of justice, fate, divine will, and human suffering. Aeschylus, who had fought at Marathon and Salamis, wrote plays about the cycles of violence and revenge, asking whether justice could ever be achieved or only endlessly pursued. His Orestia trilogy showed the evolution from blood vengeance to trial by jury, from chaos to ordered justice, perhaps reflecting Athens' own evolution. Sophocles, who wrote over 100 plays though only 7 survive complete, explored human dignity in the face of divine will, most famously in Oedipus Rex and Antigone, plays where characters struggle against fate with tragic nobility. Imagine sitting on stone seats worn smooth by countless audiences, the play beginning at dawn, actors in masks and elaborate costumes speaking in poetry, the chorus dancing and singing, thousands of your fellow citizens beside you, laughing, weeping, contemplating together. Euripides, the youngest of the 3 great tragedians, wrote plays that questioned traditional values and sympathized with society's victims and outcasts. His Medea gave voice to a wronged woman's fury. His Trojan Women, performed in 415 BCE shortly after Athens had massacred the men of the island of Melos and enslaved its women and children, forced Athenians to see war from the perspective of the conquered. These plays were not always comfortable to watch. They held up mirrors to Athenian society, asking whether its values truly reflected the wisdom it claimed. Comedy too flourished in Athens, particularly the works of Aristophanes, who wrote fantastical, bawdy, political satires that mocked everyone from politicians to philosophers. His plays criticized Athens' democracy even while depending on that democracy's freedom of speech to be performed. In Lysistrata, women from warring Greek cities go on a strike to force their men to make peace. In The Clouds, Socrates is portrayed as a ridiculous charlatan teaching worthless nonsense. These plays remind us that Athens' golden age was not stiffly serious or reverently solemn but vital, chaotic, funny, willing to laugh at itself even as it created monuments to last forever. Let the sound of ancient laughter drift through your mind. gentle and human and timeless. Athens in its golden age was not perfect. Its democracy excluded most of its population, its wealth depended on slavery and imperial tribute, its treatment of allies often resembled tyranny more than partnership. But in art, in thought, in the energy of its public life, it achieved something remarkable, creating works and ideas that transcended its own limitations. Rest now in the theater's ancient seats. Let the chorus fade to gentle silence, knowing that from this creative flowering came gifts that humanity still treasures. The story continues, but for now, simply breathe and rest. Settle yourself even more deeply now, releasing any remaining thoughts of the day, as we continue our peaceful journey through ancient Greece. We arrive now in the streets and marketplaces of Athens, where philosophy was being born not in grand temples or palaces but in everyday conversation, in questions asked between friends, in the simple but profound act of wondering why. In the Agora, the central marketplace of Athens, a stonecutter's son named Socrates could often be found, barefoot and simply dressed, engaging anyone willing to talk with him in conversation. Socrates, who lived from 469 to 399 BCE, wrote nothing himself, yet he changed philosophy forever by changing its focus. Where earlier thinkers had asked about the nature of the physical world, Socrates turned philosophy toward ethics, toward the question of how one should live. His method was deceptively simple. He would claim to know nothing and then ask questions, gently probing his conversation partner's beliefs, revealing contradictions and assumptions, leading them to see that what they thought they knew, they didn't truly understand at all. This process, which we now call the Socratic method, was not meant to humiliate but to illuminate. Socrates believed that genuine wisdom began with recognizing one's own ignorance, that the unexamined life was not worth living, that virtue was a kind of knowledge that could be pursued through reason and dialogue. He spent his days talking with anyone who would engage: politicians, poets, craftsmen, young men from wealthy families, slaves at the fountain house. He accepted no payment for his teaching, supported by his wife Xanthippes' patience and perhaps some inherited property, living simply and caring little for comfort or conventional success. Imagine encountering him in the late afternoon sun, his questions gentle but persistent, helping you see your own thoughts more clearly, like light gradually illuminating a familiar room. Socrates attracted followers, young men drawn to his questioning spirit and his moral seriousness. Among these was a young aristocrat named Plato, born around 428 BCE into one of Athens' most distinguished families. Plato seemed destined for political life, but meeting Socrates changed his path entirely. When Socrates was executed in 399 BCE on charges of impiety and corrupting the youth, charges Plato considered deeply unjust, the younger philosopher dedicated his life to preserving and extending Socrates' legacy. Plato established a school in Athens around 387 BCE in a grove sacred to the hero Academus, giving us the word academy. There, students would gather to study mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, engaging in dialogue and debate, pursuing knowledge not for practical purposes but for its own sake, for the love of wisdom itself. Plato wrote philosophical dialogues, literary works where characters debate ideas, with Socrates appearing in most of them as the central questioner. Through these dialogues, Plato explored questions that still occupy philosophers today. What is justice? What is the nature of reality? How should society be organized? What can we truly know? Plato's most famous idea, expressed in dialogues like the Republic, was his theory of forms. He proposed that the physical world we perceive with our senses is not the ultimate reality but only a shadow or reflection of a higher realm of perfect, eternal forms or ideas. The particular beautiful things we encounter in life are beautiful only because they participate in the form of beauty itself. Individual circles we draw are imperfect approximations of the perfect form of circle. This theory, mystical yet mathematical in spirit, suggested that true knowledge comes not from observing the changing physical world but from intellectual contemplation of these eternal forms, accessible only to the philosophical mind. Among Plato's students was a young man from northern Greece named Aristotle, who arrived at the academy at age 17 around 367 BCE. Aristotle studied with Plato for 20 years, until his teacher's death, absorbing the academy's teachings while gradually developing his own distinct philosophical approach. Where Plato looked toward eternal forms beyond the physical world, Aristotle turned his attention back to the world around him, observing, classifying, analyzing everything from politics to poetry, from physics to biology. Let your mind rest in that ancient school, the sound of voices and thoughtful discussion, the cool shade of olive trees, ideas unfolding like flowers opening to the sun. Aristotle eventually left Athens and traveled through the Greek world, spending time on the island of Lesbos studying marine biology, collecting specimens, dissecting sea creatures, trying to understand the principles underlying the diversity of life. His approach was empirical in a way that Plato's had not been. He believed knowledge came from careful observation of the world, from noting patterns and differences, from building up general principles from specific examples. This method, though limited by the tools and knowledge available in his time, established patterns of scientific thinking that would endure. In 343 BCE, Aristotle was invited by King Philip II of Macedon to tutor his teenage son, Alexander. For several years, Aristotle taught the young prince, exposing him to Greek literature, philosophy, and ethics. What Alexander learned from Aristotle, or what Aristotle hoped to instill in a future king, we can only imagine. But the two men's lives would diverge dramatically. Aristotle would return to Athens to found his own school, the Lyceum, while Alexander would embark on conquests that would change the ancient world forever. Aristotle's school, the Lyceum, differed from Plato's academy in emphasis and method. Where Plato had focused on mathematics and abstract philosophy, Aristotle pursued systematic study across every field of knowledge: logic, metaphysics, ethics, politics, rhetoric, poetry, biology, physics, psychology. He lectured while walking in the covered walkways of the Lyceum, giving his followers the name peripatetics, from the Greek word for walking around. His students collected and studied constitutions from Greek city-states, plant and animal specimens, examples of poetry and rhetoric, building what was essentially the first research institution, where knowledge was not only contemplated but systematically gathered, organized, and expanded. Aristotle wrote or compiled hundreds of works, though what survives are mostly lecture notes rather than polished literary dialogues like Plato's. His influence on later thought, particularly in the Middle Ages, would be immense. His logic would be studied for 2,000 years. His ethical writings would shape discussions of virtue and human flourishing. His biological observations, though sometimes incorrect, showed what patient, systematic study could achieve. He represented a particular Greek gift to humanity, the conviction that the world could be understood through reason and observation, that knowledge was worth pursuing for its own sake, that human beings could systematically study existence itself. Breathe slowly, let these ideas settle like leaves drifting down through still water. While philosophers were pursuing wisdom in Athens, other Greeks were making advances in mathematics and science. Hippocrates of Kos, who lived from around 460 to 370 BCE, transformed medicine from a mixture of religion, magic, and traditional remedies into something approaching a rational science. The Hippocratic Corpus, a collection of medical texts attributed to him and his followers, emphasized careful observation of symptoms, detailed record-keeping of diseases and their courses, and natural rather than supernatural explanations for illness. The famous Hippocratic Oath, though probably not written by Hippocrates himself, established ethical guidelines for physicians that emphasized doing no harm, maintaining patient confidentiality, and teaching medical knowledge to the next generation. The Hippocratic physicians believed in the theory of the four humors, that health depended on the balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile in the body. Though this theory was incorrect, the underlying approach was sound: systematic observation, careful diagnosis, emphasis on diet and lifestyle, recognition that the body had natural healing powers that physicians should support rather than interfere with. This was medicine as a craft practiced with reason and compassion, not magic performed by priests. And so Greek thought expanded in multiple directions at once, philosophy asking fundamental questions about existence and ethics, science beginning to observe nature systematically, medicine seeking to understand and heal the human body through reason rather than superstition. All of this unfolded in small schools and private homes, in conversations and careful observations, in the conviction that human reason was a powerful tool for understanding reality. Let these ancient thinkers fade gently from your mind now, their questions asked, their observations recorded, their influence rippling forward through centuries. Rest deeply, the story continues, but for now, simply let go and drift. If you're still listening, let yourself sink even deeper into rest, and if you've drifted away and returned, welcome back to this quiet journey. We turn now from philosophy's peaceful gardens to darker times, to a conflict that would drain Greece of its strength and change its world forever. But even in darkness, we'll walk slowly, gently, letting the story unfold like evening shadows lengthening across ancient hills. The unity that Greece had found against Persia did not last. Athens and Sparta, so different in character and values, gradually grew suspicious of each other. Athens, with its powerful navy and democratic institutions, had formed the Delian League in 478 BCE, an alliance of Greek city-states ostensibly to defend against future Persian aggression. But over time, this league had transformed into an Athenian empire. Athens moved the league's treasury from the sacred island of Delos to Athens itself, using the funds not just for common defense but to beautify their own city. Allied cities that tried to leave the league were forced back in, sometimes brutally. What had begun as a partnership of equals had become, in reality, Athenian domination. Sparta, watching Athens' growing power and increasingly imperial behavior, formed its own alliance system, the Peloponnesian League, centered in the Peloponnese Peninsula. Sparta's allies were mostly oligarchies, cities governed by small groups of wealthy citizens, while Athens championed democracy and often intervened to establish democratic governments in allied cities. The conflict between Athens and Sparta became not just a struggle for power but a clash of ideologies: democracy versus oligarchy, naval empire versus land-based alliance, cultural sophistication versus martial austerity. In 431 BCE, tensions finally erupted into open warfare. The Peloponnesian War, which would last 27 years with only brief interludes of peace, began almost accidentally, triggered by conflicts between Corinth and Athens over smaller cities. Sparta, honoring its alliance with Corinth, declared war on Athens. The Athenian strategy, designed by Pericles, was to avoid land battles where Sparta's heavy infantry excelled. Instead, Athens would rely on its navy and its long walls connecting the city to its port at Piraeus, allowing it to be supplied by sea while Spartan armies ravaged the countryside. Imagine Athens in the war's early years, the rural population of Attica abandoning their farms and olive groves, streaming into the city for protection behind those long walls, crowding into makeshift shelters, watching from the walls as Spartan soldiers burned their crops and homes each summer, then withdrew each autumn. It was a strategy of patience and endurance, trusting in Athens' wealth and naval power to outlast Sparta. But in 430 BCE, the second year of the war, disaster struck Athens in a form no one had anticipated. A plague, probably brought by ship from Egypt or Ethiopia, spread through the overcrowded city. The symptoms, described in harrowing detail by the historian Thucydides who survived the disease himself, included high fever, inflammation of the eyes, bleeding from the mouth, unbearable thirst, and lesions covering the body. The plague killed perhaps a quarter of Athens' population over the next 4 years, including Pericles himself in 429 BCE. It struck down the young and healthy as readily as the weak, and it shattered Athens' morale, making people question the gods' justice and abandon traditional pieties. Thucydides, who lived from around 460 to 400 BCE, wrote his history of the Peloponnesian War not just as a chronicle of events but as an analysis of power, human nature, and the corrupting effects of war. Unlike earlier historians who mixed myth with fact, Thucydides attempted to be rigorously factual, interviewing participants, comparing accounts, trying to understand causes and consequences. He wrote in the conviction that human nature remains constant, that the patterns he observed in the war between Athens and Sparta would recur in future conflicts, making his history useful for understanding all wars, not just this particular one. Breathe slowly, let the weight of those ancient sorrows pass through you like wind through long grass. The war dragged on year after year, neither side able to achieve decisive victory. In 415 BCE, Athens made a fateful decision. Convinced by ambitious politicians, particularly the charismatic but unreliable Alcibiades, Athens launched an enormous expedition against Syracuse in Sicily, hoping to conquer that wealthy city and use its resources to win the war. It was an audacious plan, requiring Athens to fight far from home, sustaining a massive fleet and army across hundreds of miles of sea. The Sicilian expedition, as it came to be called, was a catastrophe. The Athenian forces besieged Syracuse but could not take it. Spartan reinforcements arrived to help defend the city. When the Athenians finally decided to withdraw, they delayed too long. Their fleet was destroyed in Syracuse's harbor. Their army, retreating inland, was hunted down and either killed or captured. Nearly 40,000 men, the flower of Athenian youth and allied forces, were lost. Those who survived were imprisoned in Syracuse's stone quarries, where most died of exposure, starvation, and disease. Thucydides called it the greatest action in Hellenic history, the most glorious to the victors and the most ruinous to the defeated. Athens, remarkably, fought on for another 9 years despite this disaster. The city's resilience, its refusal to surrender even when most of its fleet was gone and its treasury depleted, testified to the spirit of its democracy and the loyalty it inspired. But Sparta, now receiving financial support from Persia, which hoped to see both Greek powers exhaust themselves, slowly strangled Athens' supply lines. In 405 BCE, a Spartan admiral named Lysander surprised and destroyed the remaining Athenian fleet at Agaspotami in the Hellespont. With no navy to protect its supply routes, Athens could no longer feed its population. In 404 BCE, after a siege that brought the city to the edge of starvation, Athens surrendered. The long walls were torn down to the music of flutes, symbolizing liberation to some, humiliation to others. Athens' empire was dissolved. A Spartan-backed oligarchy, the 30 Tyrants, briefly ruled the city with such brutality that Athenian democracy, bloodied but not dead, soon reasserted itself. But Athens' golden age was over. The city would remain culturally important, but it would never again be the dominant power in Greece. Let yourself rest in this moment of ending, not with drama but with the quiet sadness of something beautiful that has passed. Sparta's victory proved hollow. Within a generation, Sparta too would decline, unable to manage the Greek world it had won, its rigid social system unable to adapt to new challenges. The Peloponnesian War had weakened all of Greece, killing tens of thousands, bankrupting cities, breeding cynicism and moral exhaustion. The world of independent city-states, already strained, was approaching its end. Power was shifting to the edges of the Greek world, to kingdoms in the north that had watched the city-states tear themselves apart and learn from their mistakes. Yet even in this period of decline and conflict, Greek culture continued to produce works of lasting value. Thucydides wrote his history. Aristophanes continued writing comedies. Philosophers debated and taught. The great sculptor Praxiteles was born around this time and would create works of extraordinary grace and sensuality. Greek civilization, even in its political decline, remained culturally vital, its creativity not extinguished but redirected, proving that political power and cultural achievement, while often connected, do not always rise and fall together. The Greek city-states had exhausted themselves in fratricidal war, yet the Greek spirit endured, adapting, persisting, finding new forms of expression even as old certainties crumbled. Rest now in the quiet after conflict, let the dust of ancient battles settle, knowing that from endings come new beginnings, that the story continues even when individual chapters close. Breathe deeply, drift peacefully, the journey goes on, but for now, simply rest. Welcome back to this peaceful journey through time, or welcome to deeper rest if you've drifted into dreams. As we continue, we turn our gaze northward, to the kingdom of Macedon, a land that Greeks considered barely Greek at all, rustic and backward compared to the sophisticated cities of the south. Yet from this unlikely place would emerge a father and son who would change the ancient world forever, spreading Greek culture to the edges of the known earth. Macedon, in the mountainous region north of Greece proper, was a kingdom rather than a city-state, ruled by hereditary monarchs who claimed descent from the legendary hero Heracles. The Macedonians spoke a dialect of Greek that southerners found difficult to understand, and their customs seemed foreign, almost barbaric to Athenian or Spartan eyes. They drank their wine unmixed with water, which Greeks considered uncivilized. Their kings ruled with the support of a warrior nobility, a feudal system unlike the democratic or oligarchic constitutions of the southern city-states. In 359 BCE, a young man named Philip became king of Macedon after his brother died in battle. Philip was only 23, and Macedon was surrounded by enemies, its survival far from certain. But Philip proved to be one of history's great military reformers and political strategists. He had spent time as a hostage in Thebes during his youth, where he studied the military innovations of the Theban general Epaminondas, who had briefly made Thebes the dominant power in Greece. Philip absorbed these lessons and improved upon them. Imagine Philip in those early years, moving carefully, strengthening his kingdom stone by stone, securing his borders through diplomacy and selective warfare, reorganizing the Macedonian army into a formidable fighting force, exploiting the gold mines of Mount Pandion to fund his ambitions. Philip's military innovations centered on the Macedonian phalanx, an evolution of the traditional Greek formation. His soldiers carried sarissas, pikes nearly 20 feet long, much longer than the spears used by traditional hoplites. The first 5 rows of this phalanx could present their sarissas forward, creating a nearly impenetrable wall of spear points. Combined with disciplined training, mobile cavalry units, and siege equipment, Philip's army became the most effective fighting force Greece had seen. But Philip's genius extended beyond military matters. He understood that Greece's weakness lay in its divisions, the endless rivalries between city-states. He used diplomacy, bribery, strategic marriages, and selective military intervention to gradually extend Macedonian influence southward. Some Greek cities allied with him voluntarily, seeing him as a strong leader who could bring order. Others resisted fiercely, viewing him as a barbarian tyrant threatening Greek freedom. In Athens, the orator Demosthenes emerged as Philip's most eloquent opponent. Through a series of speeches known as the Philippics, Demosthenes warned his fellow Athenians of Philip's ambitions, urging them to resist Macedonian expansion while they still could. Demosthenes' oratory was legendary. He had overcome a speech impediment in his youth by practicing with pebbles in his mouth, reciting verses while running uphill, speaking above the roar of the sea. His speeches combined logical argument with passionate appeal, painting Philip as an existential threat to Greek liberty and Athenian democracy. But Athens, weakened by the Peloponnesian War and subsequent conflicts, could not muster the unity or resources to effectively resist Philip. In 338 BCE, at the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip's army decisively defeated the combined forces of Athens and Thebes. The 18-year-old Alexander, Philip's son, commanded the cavalry that delivered the decisive blow, a preview of greatness to come. After Chaeronea, Philip was the effective master of Greece, though he ruled through a federation called the League of Corinth rather than direct occupation, allowing cities to maintain nominal independence while following Macedonian leadership. Breathe slowly, let the image of that battlefield fade into the soft blur of distant history. Philip announced plans to lead a united Greek army against Persia, to avenge the Persian invasions of a century and a half earlier. But in 336 BCE, at his daughter's wedding, Philip was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards. The motives remain mysterious: personal revenge, political conspiracy, or perhaps both. Philip died at 46, his grand campaign against Persia still unfinished. His son Alexander, just 20 years old, succeeded to the Macedonian throne. Alexander the Great, as history would call him, inherited his father's kingdom, his army, and his ambitions, but he would pursue them with an intensity and scope that exceeded anything Philip might have imagined. In his brief reign, which lasted only 13 years until his death at age 33, Alexander would create the largest empire the ancient world had yet seen, spreading Greek culture from the Mediterranean to the borders of India, fundamentally changing the political and cultural landscape of the ancient world. Alexander's first task was to secure his position. Several Greek city-states, hoping a young and inexperienced king might be weak, rebelled against Macedonian leadership. Alexander's response was swift and decisive. He marched south with his army, and when Thebes continued to resist, he destroyed the city completely, sparing only the temples and the house where the poet Pindar had lived centuries before. It was a calculated act of terror that convinced other Greek cities to submit. Athens, which had celebrated news of Philip's death, sent envoys to pledge loyalty to the new king. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed into Asia with an army of about 40,000 men, beginning his campaign against the Persian Empire. At the Granicus River, he won his first major victory against Persian forces. According to accounts, Alexander personally led the cavalry charge, fighting in the thick of battle, his helmet split by an enemy's sword, saved only by the intervention of his companion Clytus. This would be Alexander's style throughout his campaigns, leading from the front, sharing his soldiers' dangers, inspiring through personal courage as much as through strategic brilliance. Let yourself drift with Alexander's army across ancient landscapes, dusty roads under endless sun, the sound of thousands of feet marching, not with tension but with the patient rhythm of a journey unfolding. In 333 BCE, at Issus, Alexander met the Persian great king Darius III in battle. Despite being outnumbered, Alexander's tactical genius and the discipline of his Macedonian phalanx won the day. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving behind his family, his mother, wife, and daughters, who fell into Alexander's hands. In a gesture that impressed even his enemies, Alexander treated them with courtesy and respect, refusing to see them as mere prisoners or spoils of war. This chivalrous treatment of Darius's family, whether motivated by genuine honor or shrewd propaganda, enhanced Alexander's reputation throughout the Persian Empire. Rather than immediately pursuing Darius, Alexander turned south along the Mediterranean coast, securing ports to prevent the Persian fleet from interfering with his campaign. He besieged Tyre, a wealthy island city that resisted for 7 months before falling. He marched into Egypt, where the Persian-dominated population welcomed him as a liberator. In Egypt, he founded Alexandria, the first and greatest of the many cities he would establish bearing his name. Alexandria would become one of the most important cities in the ancient world, a center of Greek learning and culture, home to the famous library and lighthouse that would be counted among the wonders of the ancient world. Alexander's first task was to secure his position. Several Greek city-states, hoping a young and inexperienced king might be weak, rebelled against Macedonian leadership. Alexander's response was swift and decisive. He marched south with his army, and when Thebes continued to resist, he destroyed the city completely, sparing only the temples and the house where the poet Pindar had lived centuries before. It was a calculated act of terror that convinced other Greek cities to submit. Athens, which had celebrated news of Philip's death, sent envoys to pledge loyalty to the new king. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed into Asia with an army of about 40,000 men, beginning his campaign against the Persian Empire. At the Granicus River, he won his first major victory against Persian forces. According to accounts, Alexander personally led the cavalry charge, fighting in the thick of battle, his helmet split by an enemy sword, saved only by the intervention of his companion Clytus. This would be Alexander's style throughout his campaigns, leading from the front, sharing his soldiers' dangers, inspiring through personal courage as much as through strategic brilliance. Let yourself drift with Alexander's army across ancient landscapes, dusty roads under endless sun, the sound of thousands of feet marching, not with tension but with the patient rhythm of a journey unfolding. In 333 BCE, at Issus, Alexander met the Persian great king Darius III in battle. Despite being outnumbered, Alexander's tactical genius and the discipline of his Macedonian phalanx won the day. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving behind his family, his mother, wife, and daughters, who fell into Alexander's hands. In a gesture that impressed even his enemies, Alexander treated them with courtesy and respect, refusing to see them as mere prisoners or spoils of war. This chivalrous treatment of Darius's family, whether motivated by genuine honor or shrewd propaganda, enhanced Alexander's reputation throughout the Persian Empire. Rather than immediately pursuing Darius, Alexander turned south along the Mediterranean coast, securing ports to prevent the Persian fleet from interfering with his campaign. He besieged Tyre, a wealthy island city that resisted for 7 months before falling. He marched into Egypt, where the Persian-dominated population welcomed him as a liberator. In Egypt, he founded Alexandria, the first and greatest of the many cities he would establish bearing his name. Alexandria would become one of the most important cities in the ancient world, a center of Greek learning and culture, home to the famous library and lighthouse that would be counted among the wonders of the ancient world. Alexander's conquests were only beginning, his journey carrying him ever eastward, deeper into Asia, farther from the Greek world he had known. But we'll let his story pause here for now, his army resting by the Nile, his dreams vast and unfinished. Let yourself rest as well, breathe deeply, knowing that great journeys are made of many small steps, and even conquerors must sometimes stop and sleep beneath unfamiliar stars. The story continues, but for now, peace, simply peace. Drift with us now, deeper into rest, as we follow Alexander's journey farther east, into lands where Greek armies had never ventured before. Let the story carry you gently, like a boat floating down a wide river, moving steadily but without urgency, through landscapes both strange and beautiful. From Egypt, Alexander returned to the north, ready to face Darius and the main Persian army one final time. In 331 BCE, at Gaugamela, near the ancient city of Nineveh in what is now Iraq, the two armies met on a plain that Darius had carefully chosen and prepared, even leveling the ground to give his chariots and cavalry every advantage. Darius had assembled perhaps the largest army ever gathered under Persian command, drawing troops from across his vast empire, from Ethiopia to Central Asia, a mosaic of peoples and languages united under Persian banners. Despite being outnumbered by perhaps 2 or 3 to 1, Alexander's tactical brilliance won the day. He noticed a gap in the Persian lines and led his companion cavalry in a wedge formation directly toward Darius's position. Faced with this sudden, fierce assault, Darius fled the battlefield for the second time, and his army, seeing their king retreat, began to dissolve. The Battle of Gaugamela effectively ended Persian resistance. The ancient empire of Cyrus and Darius, which had ruled the Near East for over 2 centuries, collapsed, and Alexander became its heir. Let yourself imagine the vastness of what Alexander had achieved, a young man not yet 30, now master of an empire stretching from Greece to the borders of India, ruler of lands his Macedonian ancestors could scarcely have imagined. Alexander entered Babylon, one of the ancient world's greatest cities, where he was welcomed as a liberator. He preserved the city's temples and honored its gods, showing respect for local customs and religions, a pattern he would follow throughout his conquests. From Babylon, he moved to Susa and then to Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. At Persepolis, Alexander allowed his army to loot the city and then burn the royal palace, perhaps in revenge for the Persian burning of Athens a century and a half earlier, perhaps in drunken revelry, perhaps both. The burning of Persepolis marked a symbolic end to the Persian Empire, though Alexander would spend years more consolidating his control over its vast territories. But Alexander did not simply conquer and move on. He began to envision something more ambitious, a fusion of Greek and Persian cultures, a new kind of empire where East and West might blend together. He adopted elements of Persian royal dress and court ceremony, to the dismay of his Macedonian companions who saw such things as foreign and degrading. He encouraged marriages between his soldiers and local women. He enrolled Persian soldiers into his army, training them in Macedonian tactics. He founded cities throughout his empire, settling Greek and Macedonian veterans alongside local populations, creating cosmopolitan communities where different cultures and languages mixed. Breathe slowly, picture those distant cities taking shape. Greek columns rising beside Persian gardens, a peaceful mingling of worlds. Alexander's campaign continued eastward into the remote provinces of the Persian Empire and beyond. He crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains into what is now Afghanistan, fighting through rugged terrain against fierce local resistance. He married Roxana, a princess from Bactria, cementing an alliance and perhaps genuinely falling in love, for accounts suggest Alexander was devoted to her. He pushed into Central Asia, founding more cities, including Alexandria Escate, Alexandria the Farthest, marking what he hoped was the edge of the civilized world. But the farther Alexander went from Greece and Macedon, the more tensions developed within his army and court. The Macedonian nobles who had followed him were growing weary of endless campaigning, uncomfortable with Alexander's adoption of Persian customs, suspicious of his increasing autocracy. Alexander himself was changing, perhaps corrupted by absolute power, perhaps driven by visions of divinity, perhaps simply exhausted by years of constant warfare and the immense burden of ruling an empire. Several of his closest companions died or were executed in these years, including Clitus, who had saved Alexander's life at the Granicus River but was killed by Alexander in a drunken argument, a death that Alexander bitterly regretted. In 326 BCE, Alexander crossed the Indus River, entering the Indian subcontinent. He defeated King Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes River, despite facing war elephants for the first time, massive creatures that terrified his horses and soldiers. Alexander was so impressed by Porus's courage in battle and dignity in defeat that he restored Porus to his throne and treated him as an ally. Alexander wished to continue eastward, to reach what the Greeks believed was the edge of the world, the great ocean that supposedly encircled all lands. But at the Hyphasis River, his army refused to go farther. They had been campaigning for 8 years, had marched thousands of miles from their homes, had endured deserts and mountains and countless battles. They were exhausted, homesick, frightened of the unknown lands ahead. Alexander raged and pleaded, but even his legendary powers of persuasion could not move them. For 3 days he sulked in his tent, but finally he yielded to his army's wishes, one of the few times in his life that his will was thwarted. He ordered the return journey to begin. Let the image settle gently, an army turning back at the edge of the known world, not in defeat but in the simple human desire for home and rest. The return journey was harrowing. Alexander led part of his army through the Gedrosian Desert, one of the most inhospitable regions on Earth, where many soldiers died of thirst and heat. It was perhaps Alexander's worst mistake, born of pride and the desire to surpass the legendary exploits of ancient heroes. The fleet, meanwhile, under Alexander's admiral Nearchus, explored the coast of the Indian Ocean and Persian Gulf, gathering geographic knowledge and opening sea routes between India and Mesopotamia. By 324 BCE, Alexander was back in Persia, at Susa, where he attempted to continue his fusion of Greek and Persian cultures by staging a mass wedding. He himself married Darius's daughter Statira, taking her as a second wife alongside Roxana. 90 of his officers married Persian noble women, and thousands of his soldiers married local women in a single great ceremony. It was a grand gesture toward cultural unity, though how deeply most participants embraced this vision is uncertain. Many Macedonian soldiers divorced their Persian wives once Alexander was dead. Alexander began planning new campaigns, perhaps into Arabia, perhaps around the entire coast of Africa. But in June of 323 BCE, after a drinking party in Babylon, Alexander fell ill with a fever. For days he declined, his condition growing worse despite the efforts of his physicians. On June 10th or 11th, at the age of 32, after ruling for just 13 years, Alexander died. The cause remains uncertain, perhaps malaria, perhaps typhoid fever, perhaps poison, perhaps simple exhaustion and the accumulated effects of many wounds. His last days were spent in fevered weakness, unable to speak, recognizing his officers but unable to tell them his wishes for the empire's future. When asked to whom he left his kingdom, Alexander supposedly replied, "To the strongest," though this story may be later invention. He left no clear heir. His son by Roxana would not be born until after his death, and his half-brother was mentally unfit to rule. The empire Alexander had built would soon fragment as his generals, the Diadochi or successors, fought among themselves for control, eventually carving the vast realm into separate kingdoms. And so Alexander's extraordinary journey ended, not in glorious conquest but in a sickbed in Babylon, far from the Macedonian hills where he was born. His empire would not survive him intact, yet his influence would reshape the ancient world, spreading Greek language, culture, and ideas across 3 continents, creating a new civilization we call Hellenistic, a blending of Greek and Eastern cultures that would flourish for centuries. Rest now with this ending that was also a beginning. Let Alexander's restless spirit find peace at last. Breathe deeply and drift, knowing that even the greatest journeys eventually lead home, to stillness, to sleep. We've journeyed far together through the centuries of ancient Greece, and now we arrive at our final chapter, the Hellenistic Age, when Greek culture spread across the known world, transforming and being transformed, creating something new and beautiful from the meeting of civilizations. Let yourself settle completely now, releasing any last remnants of wakefulness, as we explore this final flowering of the ancient Greek world. After Alexander's death, his generals fought among themselves for decades, each seeking to claim portions of his vast empire. These wars of succession, brutal and exhausting, eventually resulted in 3 major kingdoms emerging from the fragments. The Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, ruled by Ptolemy and his descendants, with Alexandria as its magnificent capital. The Seleucid Empire, stretching across Persia and much of the Near East. And the Antigonid kingdom in Macedon and Greece. These Hellenistic kingdoms, as we call them, were neither fully Greek nor fully Eastern, but something in between, cosmopolitan realms where Greek remained a language of government and high culture, but local traditions persisted and blended with imported Greek customs. Alexandria in Egypt became the greatest city of this new world, surpassing even Athens in wealth and cultural importance. The Ptolemies, ruling from Alexandria, established the famous library, which aimed to collect all the knowledge of the known world. At its height, the library may have contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls, texts copied from every civilization the Greeks encountered. Scholars came from throughout the Mediterranean to study there, translating works from Egyptian, Persian, Jewish, and Indian traditions into Greek, creating a repository of human knowledge unmatched in the ancient world. Picture that library, quiet halls lined with scrolls, their papyrus gently yellowed, scholars reading by lamplight, copying texts, debating interpretations, knowledge preserved and transmitted across generations, a gift from the past to the future. Adjacent to the library was the museum, not a museum as we understand it but a research institution, a community of scholars supported by royal patronage to pursue knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, and philosophy. Here, around 300 BCE, the mathematician Euclid wrote his Elements, systematically organizing geometry into axioms, propositions, and proofs, creating a textbook that would be used for over 2,000 years. His clear, logical approach to mathematics, building complex truths from simple foundations, represented Greek rationalism at its finest. Another scholar at Alexandria, Eratosthenes, became head of the library around 245 BCE. He was a polymath, writing on poetry, geography, mathematics, and philosophy. His most famous achievement was calculating the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy. Using simple geometry and observations of the sun's angle at noon in two different cities, Alexandria and Syene, he determined that the Earth was about 25,000 miles in circumference, within a few percent of the true value. This was not magic or lucky guessing but careful reasoning applied to careful observation, showing what human intelligence could achieve even with limited tools. Let yourself marvel quietly at this ancient wisdom, the Earth's size calculated without satellites or modern instruments, only sunlight, shadows, and patient thought. The Hellenistic period also saw remarkable advances in physics and engineering. Archimedes of Syracuse, who lived from about 287 to 212 BCE, was perhaps the greatest mathematician and engineer of antiquity. He discovered the principle of buoyancy while taking a bath, leaping up and running through the streets shouting "Eureka," which means "I have found it." He developed the principle of a lever, supposedly claiming "Give me a place to stand, and I shall move the earth." He invented war machines to defend Syracuse from Roman attack, including powerful catapults and mechanisms for dropping heavy stones on enemy ships. He studied the mathematics of circles, spheres, and cylinders, achieving results that anticipated calculus by nearly 2,000 years. Archimedes died when Syracuse fell to Roman forces in 212 BCE. According to legend, he was so absorbed in a mathematical problem, drawing geometric figures in the sand, that he didn't notice a Roman soldier approaching. When the soldier disturbed his diagrams, Archimedes supposedly said, "Don't disturb my circles," and was killed for his impudence. Whether true or embellished, the story captures something essential about the Greek intellectual spirit, the pursuit of knowledge so consuming that even death became secondary to the problem at hand. The Hellenistic world also produced new schools of philosophy adapted to an age when individual city-states no longer controlled their own destinies. Epicurus, who founded a school in Athens around 307 BCE, taught that the goal of life was ataraxia, a state of tranquil pleasure achieved through simple living, friendship, and freedom from fear, especially fear of death and the gods. His philosophy offered peace of mind to people living in uncertain times, suggesting that happiness came not from wealth, power, or fame but from inner tranquility in the company of friends. Zeno of Citium founded another influential school, Stoicism, teaching in Athens' stoa poikile or painted porch, giving his philosophy its name. The Stoics taught that virtue was the only true good, that external circumstances were indifferent, neither good nor bad in themselves. They emphasized accepting what cannot be changed while acting virtuously within the sphere of one's control. This philosophy, emphasizing duty, self-discipline, and equanimity in the face of fortune's changes, would profoundly influence later Roman thought and, through Rome, shape Western ethics for centuries. Breathe deeply, let these ancient philosophies of peace and acceptance settle around you like a soft blanket. The Hellenistic kingdoms gradually declined as a new power emerged in the West. Rome. One by one, the Greek kingdoms fell to Roman conquest. Macedon became a Roman province in 146 BCE, the same year that Rome destroyed Corinth. The Seleucid Empire fragmented and was absorbed piecemeal. Egypt, the last independent Hellenistic kingdom, fell to Rome in 30 BCE after the deaths of Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony, ending the Ptolemaic dynasty and, symbolically, ending the Hellenistic age. But though Rome conquered Greece politically, Greek culture conquered Rome intellectually and artistically. The Romans admired Greek literature, philosophy, art, and education, adopting and adapting Greek culture to their own purposes. Roman poets wrote in imitation of Greek models. Roman aristocrats learned Greek and quoted Greek philosophers. Greek tutors educated Roman children. The Roman poet Horace captured this paradox in a famous phrase. Captive Greece took her savage conqueror captive. Greek civilization, in this sense, never truly died but transformed, continuing through Rome and Byzantium, influencing medieval Europe, the Renaissance, and ultimately the modern world. And so our journey through ancient Greek history comes to a gentle close. From the Minoans on Crete to Alexander's empire, from Homer's epics to Hellenistic science, from the birth of democracy to the spread of Greek culture across 3 continents, we have traveled through 1,000 years and more, witnessing a civilization that asked fundamental questions about existence, justice, beauty, and truth, questions we still ask today. The Greeks were not perfect, their democracy was limited, their society dependent on slavery, their treatment of women restrictive by modern standards, their cities often at war with each other. Yet they created works of lasting beauty and value, developed modes of thought and inquiry that remain vital, established ideals of human dignity and potential that continue to inspire. Their legacy lives on in our language, our art, our politics, our philosophy, our science, in every question we ask about how to live well and understand truly. Let yourself rest now in the quiet satisfaction of the journey complete. We have walked together through ancient streets and fields, listening to philosophers and creative words, values marked in civic life, and now it is time safely to rest. The story is told, the journey done. Let the images fade gently like stars disappearing into morning light. Thank you for traveling with me through the ancient Greek world. May your sleep be peaceful and your dreams be gentle. The past is always with us, but for now, let it rest, and rest yourself, deeply, completely, peacefully. Extended peaceful pause. Close your eyes if they're not already closed. Feel the weight of your body sinking into softness, every muscle releasing, every thought drifting away like clouds dissolving into sky. The ancient Greeks walked under the same stars you see, felt the same sun warming their faces, wondered at the same mysteries, and now they sleep, as you will sleep, part of the great river of human existence that flows endlessly forward. There is nothing more to do, nowhere to go, no thoughts to think, only this moment, this breath, this gentle descent into rest. The marble temples have crumbled, the voices have faded, the wars have ended, and what remains is peace, deep, eternal, peace. Let go completely now, drift, float, fall gently into sleep like a leaf settling onto still water. Very long pause. Good night, sleep deeply, and may your dreams be filled with ancient sunlight and infinite calm. Go completely now, drift, float, fall gently into sleep like a leaf settling onto still water. Very long pause. Good night, sleep deeply, and may your dreams be filled with ancient sunlight and infinite calm.